My name is Nosa Garrick. I am a senior associate at Olisa Agwakuba Legal. I'm just going to be having a brief chat about the startup space, particularly with reference to founders' agreements. I think one of the most interesting things that been going on in the Nigerian business space is how a lot of startups have been able to spring out and come out from different sectors, but primarily in the tech space. So you have a lot of startups coming up from the agri-tech, fintech, and logitech, different areas of the tech space. And I think there's a lot of, one interesting thing in that field is the amount of collaboration that we see in that space. You have a group of co-founders coming together to start an initiative to convert that into a business plan. But from our advice and looking into various startups that we interact with, we find out that there's this lacuna in planning that seems to be recurrent, and that's the area of founders' agreements. Now you find a partner or a group of friends come together to want to bring something into life, and then what we find is that they just jump off from the planning or the idea and just start into execution without solidifying the business arrangements and agreements that they ideally should have put in place. And that's what the founders agreement really does for you. It gives you the ability for you to set up the structure and framework within which your relationship or your collaboration is going to exist. So we have a founders agreement, which is basically like a contractual document that's executed by co-founders to really cover essential areas of their business relationship in relation to that startup. And so one of the most important things for a founders agreement is actually the dispute resolution. You know, not every startup that's come to the limelight actually came just without some level of, you know, conflict. Not necessarily conflict, but yeah, even though it's a minute conflict, there are also instances where there are startups that really never started, so you can't really call them startups. Yeah, so the co-founders agreement or the founders agreement is a document that is very essential to this space, and is one that we tend to encourage our clients in that space to make sure that they have in place. So the question you ask is, what do you find in typically, what does a co-founders agreement or a founders agreement, what does that really entail? So you'd want to see areas of stake, equity stake, for example. You'd say if you have or you're establishing a company, right? How much stake do I have and how much stake do you have in that company? So the founders agreement actually clarifies this and puts this in place. Another thing that you want to see in that space or in the founders agreement is the contribution of work. So what is your role? So you see, especially in the tech space, which will be my point of reference for this this chat, would be you have the CTO, you have a CTO, you have the CEO. So these different roles have, these different positions have different roles. So in the founders agreement, you see that it clearly states what the CTO should do and should not do, and what the CEO should do and should not do, and their roles. So what this is it is then from this founders agreement that some other detailed documents, you know, you transpose them into other detailed documents. But at the preliminary stage, it really gives you an insight into what the roles of these individuals are. Another thing that you look into is in terms of how is the company going to run? What is the execution plan for this company in terms of finding the company itself? So you're talking about pre-incorporation issues. So founders agreement tends to cover this. And another thing you can find in there, which is what I made reference to before, which is dispute resolution. You know, there may be an exit clauses, for example. So for example, I've been privileged to have an interaction with one of the startups that we advise, and they didn't have a founders agreement actually, and you know, the issue arose where one of the founders was no longer interested in the project and wanted to pull out, but that person had already put in a lot of money, put in a lot of work into establishing that company because they were bootstrapping. So, we had, although we're able to resolve that, but if we had the founders agreement, it would have been tidier to be able to resolve issues like that. So one of the very key points which the founders agreement also covers is what you call the capital contribution, if at all. There's times where when you're financing a startup at the initial point in time, there's something what you call bootstrapping, which essentially means the founders coming together to raise their own money from their personal expenses, from their personal pockets to try and fund the project. So at that point in time, founders agreement actually takes care of issues like this as to how much am I contributing and how much are you contributing, or how much have you contributed, or how much have I contributed into this project. And it just basically makes things clearer, makes things neater, and that just makes the workflow easy when you then incorporate the company, and then that of you then translates into the incorporation documents and subsequent documents, operational documents that the startup then runs with. A key point which your founders agreement also talks about is the vision, actually. So what is the vision of this company, the startup that you're trying to pursue? You see, that is most of the sound companies that exist, the Fortune 500s and the rest of them, that they started off from a vision or from an idea. The founders agreements, it's an area that people don't really talk about when they talk about founders agreement. They just talk about the generic part. But this is a very key area which I find quite interesting and quite necessary to talk about, the vision and the goal for that project. So the founder agreement doesn't only set up some level of structure to you, it also gives you a sense of direction as co-founders or as founders to a project or to a startup. So these and many other things are why it's very essential for you to have a founders agreement in place. An important question that may be asked is when is the right time for you to have a founders agreement, and could you have it, or in the event that you've started a project and you haven't really put in place a founders agreement, what time is the best time? And I think for obvious reasons, the best time will be prior to you having that you starting the process of having a company or establishing a startup. So the founders agreement should actually come pre that area. However, in the event that you've actually started, for example, we have clients that are in that space, you actually can create a founders agreement retrospectively, and that may not be as tidy as and I wouldn't advise that personally or professionally, but it's something that can still be done to just put things in place, especially when you are at the very early stage of your startup. So a final point where that we tend to a final question that we tend to hear or receive when we engage persons in this space, or is the question as to whether the startup agreement, the founders agreement, actually could be oral. You tend to have people say they already agreed on some specifics, and then when we ask questions in relation to what those specifics are, you try to recollect from memory. We're not saying that a founders agreement cannot be oral, in terms of oral agreements are not necessarily binding, or oral agreements. We're not saying that oral agreements do not necessarily have some level of relevance in this space. Of what essentially we're saying is that it's better and it's clearer to have it documented. It should be written. It should be preferably reviewed and prepared by a legal practitioner. And that would really give your startup a clear and fantastic start space to ensure that you're going for to be successful. I hope this has been able to help you, get a clear understanding of the necessary things that you need to do before you proceed to pursuing your startup, or before you decide to chase that idea. All right, till next time, bye.